We're counting down the 10 most bizarre steam locomotives ever built, a ranking where odd engineering, risky experiments, and mind-bending ideas take center stage. From cab placements that put the crew in danger to machines that tried to turn coal into turbulence, some of these ran decades ahead of their time, while others barely survived a test run. Expect steam-powered giants with tenders bigger than the engines themselves, locomotives that looked like they were built backwards, and prototypes that aimed for the future but landed in the scrapyard. Which design tops the list as the strangest of all? Let's start at number 10, with a locomotive that forced its engineer to ride right on top of the boiler. Number 10 on the list looks wrong from the moment you see it. The Camelback locomotive has its cab perched right on top of the boiler. This strange design was not a stylistic choice. It was all about burning anthracite culm, a cheap, hard-to-ignite coal waste found in the northeastern United States. The solution was the massive Wootton firebox, so wide it could not fit between the wheels in the usual spot. Designers had to mount the engineer's cab astride the boiler halfway down the frame, leaving the fireman alone on a tiny exposed platform at the back. The engineer sat just inches above a roaring firebox, cut off from the fireman by tons of steel and noise. Communication was reduced to shouts or banging on the boiler. Heat and poor visibility were constant threats. Injury records from the era show Camelback crews suffered twice the accident rate of standard engines. By 1927, the Interstate Commerce Commission banned new Camelbacks, citing unacceptable risk. These locomotives proved that chasing fuel savings could twist a locomotive's shape and put the real cost squarely on the people who ran them. Southern Pacific's AC-12 didn't just turn heads, it turned the entire locomotive around. In a world where steam engines always put the cab at the back, these monsters ran with the engineer and fireman leading the charge, staring down the tracks from the very front. The reason lay deep in the Sierra Nevada, where tunnels and snow sheds trapped smoke so thick, crews sometimes staggered out gasping for air. Smoke choked men and made some runs dangerous. The solution was radical. Move the cab ahead of the boiler, put the exhaust at the rear, and let the crew breathe clean mountain air even as the engine roared through miles of darkness. This was only possible because the AC-12 burned oil, not coal. Fuel could be piped from the tender at the back to the firebox up front, no shoveling required. Wartime records show these cab forwards hauled up to 7,000 tons over Donner Pass, day after day, with reliability that kept supplies flowing to the Pacific. 7,000 was a typical maximum haul on steep grades. Old-timers called them backwards engines, and some refused to trust a locomotive that, in their words, pulled with its tail. But for the men who ran them, the AC-12 meant survival, proof that sometimes the right way forward means flipping everything around. Crossing the vast, dry heart of South Africa, steam locomotives faced a problem as old as the desert itself: water. The answer arrived in the form of the Class 25 condensing 484, a machine that turned its own exhaust into a lifeline. Instead of wasting steam in thick clouds, these locomotives captured it, funneled it through a maze of radiator tubes, and cooled it back into water, ready to be used again. The result was a tender so massive and packed with machinery, it dwarfed the locomotive pulling it. With 6 steam-driven fans and more than 2 miles of radiator piping, the tender looked less like a train car and more like a rolling factory. On a good day, the system could recover up to 90% of the water, stretching the range to nearly 800 kilometers between stops. But all that complexity came at a price. Radiator tubes clogged with scale, fans demanded constant attention, and the sheer weight of the tender wore down the rails. Maintenance logs from the 1960s tell the story of crews battling fouled pipes and failing pumps, sometimes spending more time cleaning than running. The Class 25 condenser was brilliant in theory and spectacular in person, but its thirst for upkeep eventually outpaced even its ability to save water. The Beyer-Garratt looks like a locomotive that couldn't make up its mind. 2 engines at either end, with the boiler and cab suspended in the middle, floating above the rails. At first glance, it seems bizarre. This 3-part design wasn't just for show. On the narrow, lightly built tracks of Africa and Australia, traditional steam engines sank bridges and buckled rails. The Garratt solved that by spreading its weight across two powered bogies, each carrying its own water and fuel. Instead of dragging a tender behind, the locomotive's supplies rode along for the journey, directly under the driving wheels. This meant more weight on the rails where it counted, improving traction without crushing the track. As water and coal were used up, the load lightened on each bogie, but the central boiler always balanced evenly between them. In East Africa, the massive 59-class Garratts hauled trains over 2,000 tons across bridges that once struggled with half that weight. Crews described them as the engine that bends twice, able to snake through tight curves and keep going where rigid locomotives would stall. The Garratt's odd shape and shifting weight made it a handful on rough track, and flexible steam joints needed constant attention. But for the world's toughest railways, it turned the locomotive itself into the train, a bizarre, brilliant answer to impossible geography. The LNER W1 rolled out of the shops in 1929, looking more like a submarine than a steam locomotive. Under its smooth, streamlined shell hid the boldest experiment in British railway history, a water tube boiler borrowed from warships. Instead of a simple fire tube design, this engine used a maze of narrow pipes to withstand pressures up to 450 pounds per square inch, promising unmatched efficiency and power. On paper, it was the future. Higher pressures meant more steam from less coal and the potential to leap ahead of every rival on the rails. But the W1 secrets ran deep. Test runs were shrouded in mystery, with engineers sworn to silence and the press kept at bay. Diaries from the National Railway Museum tell of endless hours spent coaxing the boiler to behave, fighting scaling and foaming that clogged the delicate tubes and threatened sudden failure. Maintenance crews dreaded every inspection. One missed deposit could trigger a cascade of leaks. In service, the W1 never lived up to its ghostly promise. It ran hot, demanded constant attention, and spent more time in the shops than on the main line. Only one was ever built. In the end, the W1 called Hush-Hush was a beautiful phantom, haunted by the gap between radical ambition and the stubborn reality of steam. Post-war Britain was desperate to modernize, and steam had to fight for its place on the rails. Enter the Bulleid leader, a locomotive that looked like a diesel and tried to act like one too. Oliver Bulleid's vision was radical, a fully enclosed, double-ended machine, oil-fired and equipped with a mechanical stoker. The wheels and drive gear were boxed inside a metal shell, hidden from view and shielded from the weather. In theory, this meant cleaner lines, less crew exposure, and easier operation. Just drive from either end, no need to turn the engine. But the reality inside the leader was far from comfortable. Heat built up in the sealed body, filling the cab with stifling air and engine fumes. The crew sweated through shifts, with poor visibility and almost no fresh air. Maintenance teams found themselves crawling through tight, greasy corridors to reach the wheel sets, cursing the very enclosure that was supposed to keep things modern, a SLEF union. Minutes from 1950 are filled with complaints about the working conditions and the near impossibility of keeping the machinery clean or cool. The leader ran a handful of test trains, but by 1951, the experiment was over. Every unit was scrapped, the bold dream buried under a mountain of maintenance logs and union grievances. The leader proved that you could disguise a steam locomotive in diesel clothing, but you could not make it live like one. The Erie Triplex wasn't just big, it was a mechanical dare that pushed the limits of steam power into the realm of the absurd. Built by Alco between 1914 and 1916 for the Erie Railroad, this 28882 behemoth had 3 sets of driving wheels, including one set tucked under the tender. That meant 24 powered wheels clawing at the rails, all fed by a single boiler. On paper, it could generate a tractive effort of 120,000 pounds, enough to snap couplers and rip yard tracks apart. Crews quickly found out that was the easy part. The real challenge came when the Triplex tried to move at anything faster than a crawl. The boiler simply could not keep up, starving the third engine set of steam and causing pressure to collapse above 15 miles per hour. Test data from Erie's own records show performance dropping off a cliff once the train left the yard, with the massive cylinders gasping for steam before the train even hit mainline speeds. Maintenance logs tell of endless valve gear adjustments and boiler tube leaks, with downtime far outpacing actual running hours. Yard workers nicknamed it Yard Ripper because while it could drag a mountain of coal cars out of the terminal, it could barely make it to the next town. The Triplex stands as a cautionary tale. Sometimes, adding more power just means finding new ways to run out of steam. The Pennsylvania Railroad S2 looked like something out of science fiction, a 123-foot-long machine sheathed in streamlined steel, driven not by pistons, but by a direct-drive steam turbine. Built by Baldwin in 1944, the S2 was a bold attempt to bring jet-age technology to the rails, promising 6,900 horsepower and a ride smoother than any conventional steam engine. But the heart of the S2 was its gamble. Turbines thrive on steady, high-speed running. On the open mainline above 40 miles per hour, dynamometer logs from Altoona show the S2 closing in on diesel like efficiency, its turbines spinning at full song, burning less fuel per ton-mile than many of its piston-powered rivals. The reality of freight railroading is far from constant. Trains crawl out of yards, stop for signals, and grind up grades. At these low speeds, the S2's turbine became a liability. Test data from the Pennsylvania Railroad's own records reveal a harsh truth. At 20 miles per hour, the S2 devoured coal and water 2 to 3 times faster than a standard 284. Turbine efficiency plummeted below 25%, while the boiler struggled to keep up with steam demand, often leading to pressure drops and sluggish starts. Engineers noted the difference instantly. The S2 was eerily quiet at speed, but at a crawl, it was all steam and no go. Despite its futuristic promise, the S2's direct drive turbine made it a thoroughbred on the fast stretches and a burden everywhere else. It ran for just a few years before being sidelined, not for lack of vision, but because the railroad needed a locomotive that could do it all. The S2 stands as a testament to radical propulsion, an engine that sounded like the future but could not quite live in the present. The Chesapeake and Ohio M1 looked like a vision of the future, a long, low shell wrapped in smooth steel, gliding across the rails with barely a sound. Under that streamlined body, though, was a machine locked in a battle with itself. The M1 was a steam locomotive, but it did not drive its wheels the old-fashioned way. Instead, a coal-fired boiler made steam, which spun 2 turbines and powered electric generators. Those generators fed traction motors on every axle. On paper, this promised the best of both worlds, the smooth pull of electric drive, the raw force of steam, and a design that could rival any diesel for speed and style. But every mile revealed a new weakness. Coal dust and ash, the constant companions of steam, found their way into the turbines, coating blades, clogging passages, and grinding down delicate parts. Maintenance logs from the late 1940s read like a litany of frustration. Turbines fouled, generators running hot, traction motors tripping out under heavy load. The M1's heat was relentless. Crew reports tell of electrical cabinets hot enough to scorch a hand and cooling fans that never seemed strong enough to keep up. Even the streamlined casing became a liability, trapping smoke and heat inside and turning the engine room into a furnace. Test runs showed the M1 could haul heavy trains at speed, but the cost was constant breakdowns and endless repairs. Coal ash wore down the turbines faster than anyone expected, and the boiler struggled to keep up with the turbine's appetite for steam. The M1 ran for less than 5 years before the railroad gave up, sidelining the experiment as a beautiful, expensive warning. It stands as proof that even the most ambitious hybrid can be brought down by the simplest enemy, heat, dust, and the stubborn realities of coal-fired steam. The last gasp of steam power came in the form of a machine that looked nothing like its ancestors. Norfolk and Western's Jawn Henry stretched nearly 161 feet from end to end, wrapped in a boxy shell that had more in common with a diesel-electric than any classic steam engine. Underneath that hulking body, though, was a gamble no other railroad dared. It was a coal-fired steam generator, feeding a direct drive turbine, which in turn powered electric traction motors on every axle. The idea was simple, at least on paper. Take the smooth, powerful pull of a turbine, the flexibility of electric drive, and the raw energy of coal, and combine them into a single, unstoppable locomotive. In practice, Jawn Henry became a rolling laboratory for every problem steam technology could not quite solve. Coal dust and ash, the constant byproducts of its own boiler, crept into turbine blades and generator windings, grinding down delicate parts and choking the machinery. Maintenance diaries from Roanoke shops are filled with notes about clogged filters, burnt-out motors, and turbine failures that left the engine stranded miles from help. The controls were a maze of switches and gauges, more airplane cockpit than locomotive cab, and even the most experienced crews struggled to keep the systems balanced. Every trip was a test run, every mile a risk. Despite its size and promise, Jawn Henry spent more time in the shop than on the rails. In less than 3 years, it was retired, beaten not by competition but by its own complexity. Press releases from 1958 read like a quiet obituary for an era. The age of coal-fired innovation had ended, replaced by the steady hum of diesel-electric engines. Jawn Henry was more than just an experiment. It was the final, towering statement of faith in steam, a machine that tried to turn an entire train into a moving power plant. When it failed, it did not just close the book on bizarre steam locomotives. It drew the curtain on a century of coal, fire, and ambition. No locomotive ever tried so hard to keep steam alive. None made its end so clear. Across all 10 bizarre locomotives, one pattern stands out. True innovation in engineering often looks absurd before it changes the world, or fails trying. These wild experiments reveal that progress demands risk, and not every leap lands safely. Even today, breakthroughs begin with ideas that seem impossible. In railroading and beyond, the future always starts out looking strange.